Here is Liverpool, and here is Manchester. They are not good friends. They are rivals. So much rivalry is between them that it becomes one of the most famous storylines in all of Britain, and is even known outside Britain. This rivalry is especially known to football fans, with the teams Manchester United and Liverpool FC, each being the most representative teams of their own region, becoming fierce rivals until today, except for once. In 1958, a failed takeoff attempt at Munich Rhein Airport resulted in the death of 23 civilians. Among them were 8 Man United players and 3 staff members, with another 2 forced into retirement due to injury. This would go down in history as the Munich air disaster. But not all is lost. The disaster, at least temporarily, brought United and Liverpool together. How? First, we'll have to explain the concept, the realistic conflict theory.
The realistic conflict theory is a social model proposed by Mustafa Sherif, which accounts for intergroup conflicts. The theory describes that in the face of conflicting goals or competition of scarce resources, which are perceived to be valuable, hostility, complements with conflict, prejudice, and discrimination, or even dehumanization will arise between groups. Such intergroup conflicts occur between 2 or more groups, in which groups are formed based on the inherent characteristics of members or shared features. As conflicts progress, members of the same group would come to believe that they are bridged together and would share the same destiny.
To explain this theory, Sherif and Caroline Wood conducted a study called Robbers Cave Experiment in Robbers Cave State Park for over 3 weeks in 1954. The study observed 22 boys of 11 to 12 years old who had never met each other but with comparable backgrounds. Sherif and Caroline divided the study into 3 stages of group processes, corresponding to 3 respective stages in his theory. We'll explain them one by one. The first stage is the in-group formation. The 22 boys, thinking they're participating in a summer camp, were separated into 2 groups without knowing the other group's existence. They were encouraged to bond through cooperative tasks, such as naming their group and developing group hierarchies. Within the group, they began to identify each other as their own in-group members.
Negative attitude is particularly intense when a group view the conflicting goals or competition as a zero-sum game, with one's group success in attaining the desired goals or resources fundamentally indicating the failure of the other. This triggers the 2 groups to develop resentment towards their outgroup. The term resources here does not limit to the materialistic ones that would generally pop into our head, given money, food, or energy. It can actually point to a broader scope, with power and social status being included too. The intensity and duration of conflicts vary, depending on the appraised values and the scarcity of resources.
Going back to the study, the second stage is the friction phase. After a short period of time, the 2 groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers, knew that there was another group at the camp as they entered in a competitive tournament of various camp games, like baseball and tug of war, of which trophy and valued prizes would be awarded to the winning group. With the competition kicked in, various intergroup conflicts, from verbal taunting to flag burning and even private property stealing, negative attitudes and hostile behaviors towards the outgroup were observed in this stage. During the subsequent cooling off period, the boys tended to categorize their own in-group in very favorable terms and the outgroup in very unfavorable terms.
It was also mentioned by Sherif that it is possible for harmony to emerge and tension between groups to be reduced when the 2 opposing groups are pursuing some superordinate goals. Simply put, a superordinate goal is something that is valued by both the group and can only be gained through the cooperation and interdependence of the 2. The 2 would then team up and would eventually bring themselves to unity.
So as you could imagine, the third stage of the study is the integration stage. During this stage, teamwork-driven tasks were given to have both groups work together on goals that both cared about. For example, they had to fix the camp's water supply, which was intentionally cut off by the researchers. Throughout the activities of shared goals, the tension between the two groups was gradually reduced.
Sheriff made several conclusions based on the three-stage Robert's cave experiment, adding to the realistic conflict theory. From the study, he determined that because the groups were created to be approximately equal, individual differences were not necessary or responsible for intergroup conflict to occur. Second, as seen in the study, when the boys were competing in camp games for valid prizes, Sheriff noted that hostile and aggressive attitudes towards an outgroup arise when groups competed for resources that only one group could attain. Sheriff also established that contact with an outgroup was inefficient by itself to reduce negative attitudes. He concluded that friction between groups could be reduced along with positive intergroup relations maintained, only in the presence of superordinate goals that promote united, cooperative actions.
So, how can we apply the realistic conflict theory to explain the friendship between Manchester United and Liverpool in 1958? First of all, people from Manchester, called Mancunians, and people from Liverpool, called Scousers, formed two different in-groups based on their geographical location. At the beginning, the two groups are not in conflict at all. In fact, they worked quite well together, such as building the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the first intercity railway in the world. However, the two groups slowly got into the second stage of the theory. During the majority of the 19th century, Liverpool had been charging Manchester for their imports and exports. In 1872, Manchester merchants had enough of it and built the Manchester Ship Canal to avoid the charges. Needless to say, the Scousers were not happy about that. And so began the famous rivalry. The conflict also found its way into football. Both the fans and the players brought a lot of resentment into matches, and violence between fans and players could easily boom. The clubs themselves also had a great disdain for each other, and often refused player transfers from one another. This is interesting because fundamentally, the two clubs had no conflict of interest. The initial resources conflict increased the in-group bias for both cities, and brought forth conflicts and violence even in rather unrelated fields, like football. The Munich air disaster was one of the very few incidents that united the two clubs. After the incident, Liverpool was one of the most helpful clubs to Manchester United, offering 5-player loans to the team, while then Liverpool manager Bill Shankly offered to pay the Man United players' wage as the club's financials spiraled down after the incident. Here, we see the third stage of the theory. When an external disaster struck, both Liverpool and Manchester United took part in a superordinate goal to help Manchester United recover. And through working on the goal, the two clubs briefly became friends.
Now I believe you understand what is realistic conflict theory. Just as a quick recap, the realistic conflict theory describes that in the face of conflicting goals or competition between two groups, the bonding between the intra-group members will be strengthened as they are competing with the outgroup. As the competition progresses, intergroup frictions will be heightened and intensified, particularly heightened when the groups view the competition as a zero-sum game. And interestingly, in the presence of superordinate goals that promote united, cooperative actions, friction between groups could be reduced along with the positive intergroup relations nurtured. Interesting. Next time when you are forced to participate in a project with your irreconcilable foes, at some point maybe you will be friends with them.